You are probably going to think I am crazy. I think I am crazy, and I lived it. I was on vacation with my spouse. We had decided that we would go to a state that we haven't even traveled to before, and we decided that South Carolina was where it was at. I always loved the idea of the Carolinas. Anyone I talked to always told me how beautiful they were. It was a no-brainer when we decided to go out of our comfort zone and try somewhere new. I didn't expect that trip to completely destroy my view of South Carolina, but it did. I was so excited because normally when we travel, we go to the same places: Dallas, Denver, Albuquerque, and I was ready for a new adventure. So when my spouse said, "Let's go somewhere new," I quickly told them I wanted to go to South Carolina. I wanted the beach and the exciting energy that I always had heard about from friends that had traveled there. They forgot to mention the unnatural creatures that shared the area. We had been in Columbia, South Carolina for a few days, but I was ready to get out of the city and hit some small towns on the way to the beach. I wanted to stay in small hotels along the way and really enjoy our trip. Thankfully, my spouse loves to travel as much as I do and was 100% game to do the touristy thing with me. The first small-town hotel was cute. We had fun eating at the diners in town, shopping, and just taking in the scenery. But all good things come to an end. We moved on to the next town, checked into our room, and went in search of food. By the time we were done eating, it was late-ish. Not quite dusk, but also not night. That perfect time between the two. We were walking back to our hotel, talking about what we wanted to do the next day, and I was trying to convince them that we should go to the antique store that we had passed on our way into town. I was enjoying the walk, and had almost convinced them when we saw movement in the shadows. I wrote it off as just someone walking home. We had never been in this town before, so I didn't know any better. I felt slightly uneasy, but I didn't let it stop me. I was determined to go antique shopping the next day. My spouse and I were laughing as we hit the parking lot of the hotel. However, my laughter quickly stopped when I saw movement again. Something was very, very off. I rushed us into our hotel room, locking the door behind us, my nerves screaming that something was wrong, but I couldn't place the fear. It made no sense. I knew that I wanted out of this town. I let my spouse know that maybe we just move on in the morning, which made no sense. They argued that I had gotten them excited to go to the shop and that we could leave tomorrow night like we planned. I didn't want to fight about it and ruin our vacation, so I agreed, and we headed to bed. I struggled to sleep that night. The next morning I felt foolish. Of course, there would be things I was unfamiliar with in this town. I had never been there. It was all new to me. My spouse and I spent the day trying a new dinner, picking antiques and checking out the little town shops, buying souvenirs and postcards to send ourselves from on the road. I was feeling very comfortable as our day came to an end, and we loaded the car with our suitcases. I was ready to get to the next town, check in, and plan out tomorrow. I had no idea that our trip was about to become memorable for a truly terrifying reason. We had only been on the road for about an hour. We were trying to get close to the beach before we stopped for the night, but not too close because we weren't ready to give up our small-town days. The road we were driving down was gorgeous, even in the dark. The trees had grown up tall and their branches reached across the road, making a sort of tunnel. Our headlights were shining against the trees and signs, but that wasn't all. Suddenly they lit up a strange figure. We were out in the middle of nowhere and we were worried that it was someone needing a ride, so we pulled off the road and turned our hazards on. I opened the door and called out. I immediately regretted my choice. The figure had been crouched down, and when it stood, it towered over me. The thing, because it was clearly not human, swung its lizard-like head around to stare at me. My breath caught in my throat, and my spouse started pulling on my jeans to get me back in the car. I jumped back in our car and shut my door. I didn't even have the chance to put our car in drive before the creature was jumping on the hood. The yellow eyes are something I will never forget. My spouse started screaming as the lizard-like thing started scratching its huge claws down the hood of our car. I frantically fumbled our car into gear, slamming on the gas and praying that I can get this thing off of our car before it comes through the windshield. but it just dug its claws deeper into the hood. I slammed on the brakes, which threw the creature onto the ground in front of us. My spouse just said, "Go," and I went. I went around the creature and floored it, getting us as far from the area as I could. We were both shaking as we made it into the next town, but we decided that we were just going to keep going. We didn't want to risk whatever it was finding us again. From now on, I am going to be looking into all of the creepy stories of an area before we decide to travel there. I'm all good on the scary unknown. I've had my fill. This is a story that happened to me almost 30 years ago. Honestly, it's been so long that I nearly forgot all about it. I lived in Philadelphia at the time, but my uncle had a home that he purchased out in Chester County, about an hour away. Every weekend I would beg my parents to let me go stay with him. My uncle wasn't married and didn't have any kids, and he genuinely enjoyed when I would come to visit. Most of the time I would help him with his various projects around his considerable property, or we would go fishing at the small lake that you could see from his back deck. It was on one such of these weekend trips that this story takes place. I was around 6 or 7 when it happened. My dad had dropped me off at my uncle's on Friday after school and would be coming to pick me up on Sunday morning. Me and my uncle just hung out that night eating pizza and watching some scary movies that my parents would never have let me see. The next day after breakfast, my uncle said he had some work to do in the basement and that it would take a while. He said he didn't want me to help him because some of the building materials they used to build the old house might get me sick, so he told me to go outside and play. Times were different then, and his neighborhood, if you could call it that, was very quiet and safe. There were no other neighbors nearby, really, and the only other house in sight was a really old ramshackle house across the lake. So I was messing around outside for about a half hour when I saw somebody standing down by the lake. It was a few hundred feet down from the house, and there was a dirt path that led from the back of the property to the shoreline. The figure waved to me to come down, and not knowing any better, walked down to meet them. The person waiting for me by the lake was an extremely old woman. Granted, when you're a kid, everyone seems old. I couldn't tell exactly, but she was probably one of the oldest people I have ever seen. And this is where things got hazy. I have a vague memory of the woman telling me she had lots of nice toys on the other side of the lake, and she wanted to take me to see them. But in order to get there, we would have to walk across the lake. Finally, I remember her holding my hand. The next thing I have a concrete memory of is my uncle holding me and walking with me back up the trail to the house, my clothes soaking wet. He was asking me why I was standing in the lake, and he seemed kind of upset at me. We got to the house, and my uncle got me a change of clothes and let me get dressed. When I was done, he was waiting for me at the table and asked me to explain myself, so I did. He let me finish my story, listening very intently as I told it. When I was done, he asked me questions about the old lady, only I couldn't really remember any details about her at all. It was weird because she was literally right next to me, but it was like trying to recall any specific features about her pushed the memory farther away. After all that, my uncle told me that he came out of the house to check on me and saw me standing about 10 feet into the lake, the water almost above my shoulders. There was no old lady. My uncle decided to pause his project, and we spent the rest of the day just hanging out. My parents picked me up the next day, and that was the end of it. I went back a bunch more times, but never saw the old woman again. My uncle didn't really let me out of sight either, though. So why am I telling this story now? My uncle is one of those guys blessed with eternal youth. 30 years later, and he still has enough energy to swing a hammer and dig in his garden. And now I'm a father myself, my son having recently turned 7 years old. The memories of that day having long receded, I decided it would be good for my son to get out of the city and spend some time with my uncle. My son had been there twice, but never without me, and never for an entire weekend. So, we made the arrangements. Friday after school, I dropped him off to spend the weekend with my uncle, just as I had when I was a kid. I talked to him the next morning, and all seemed well, and I told him I would call him again later. I got a call from my uncle at around 5 p.m. He assured me that my son was fine, but I needed to come and pick him up right now, and he would explain when I got there. I made the 90-minute drive in just under 50. When I got there, I could instantly see that my son was indeed okay, and he told me that he wanted to stay. My uncle told me to step outside with him so we could talk. See, a few years after my incident at the lake, my uncle had heard a legend from a local that he became friends with. The local had told him that early in the 1940s, a family used to live in that old abandoned house across the lake. A husband and wife, and their son of 10. When World War II broke out, the husband was drafted and ultimately died on Omaha Beach. The woman was now alone with her son and was suffering from the death of her husband. Over the following year, her mental health deteriorated rapidly, and at one point, a span of weeks had passed without anyone seeing either her or her son. When the local sheriff went to go check on her, he found both her and her son's bodies floating in that same lake. Bloated and waterlogged, they had been there for weeks. The son's hands and legs had been tied with thick rope. The investigation never turned up any clues as to how they had died in the lake. My uncle told me all of this, and then told me why he had called. Earlier that day, he had sat down on the couch for a few minutes just to rest, and had accidentally fallen asleep. My son, being too kind to wake him, decided to go outside for a little bit and entertain himself. My uncle said he suddenly woke up in a panic. He couldn't explain why. After seeing my son wasn't in the house, he went out the back door onto the deck to find him. He spotted him wading into the lake, the water already at his chest. He raced down to the water and dove in just as my son dipped below the surface. He was able to pull him back to shore. He said my son was dazed, like he wasn't really there, but after taking him back to the house and drying him off, my son slowly came around. And he asked my son what had happened. My son told him the same exact story I had almost 3 decades ago, that an old woman had beckoned him to the lake's edge, took his hand, and walked with him into the water. There wasn't much else to say to each other. Not in the mood for speculation or conversation, I simply just sat beside my son for a good while, until I decided that we should get home. I never asked him about the incident, and he never offered anything up, almost like had forgotten it. My son hasn't and won't be going back to my uncle's house. It's not his fault, of course. He is a wonderful guy, and I don't hold any of it against him. It's just, whatever we experienced, whatever that lake or that lady is, it's unnatural. Ghost, demon, entity, I don't know. I'm only sharing this story as a warning to other parents. Something sinister exists in the world, something evil and wretched. Just be safe, and keep your children close. This happened about 15 years ago now. I was right around 9 or 10 years old. I was camping with my family in eastern Kentucky. We would go camping together a couple of times each summer when the weather permitted. One of the campgrounds we would go to was on the backside of the mountains. I never liked that particular campground very much. Since we were on the eastern side of the mountains, sunset would come on early, and then all of a sudden it was pitch black out. As a kid, this meant less time to run around the woods with my siblings. My parents were always very strict about having us back at the tent by dark. I can't remember the name of the park offhand. I do remember that all the campsites were hike-in only, meaning we had to park the car at one of the lots inside the park and carry all our camping gear a few miles down the trail to the campgrounds. There were vault toilets at the campgrounds, but no showers or running water, and definitely no electricity, so we had to carry in everything. The hike to the site felt unnecessarily long and grueling to me, but I was only a kid at the time. I'm sure it wasn't more than a couple of miles from the parking lot. We got there on a Friday night after my parents both got home from work, and we planned to stay until Sunday afternoon. Nothing nefarious happened the first night, but I distinctly remember having a strange feeling around the campground. There was a change in the atmosphere from the last time we were there. You know how you can feel a storm coming on before it hits? It was like that, but it wasn't a storm. It was like I could just feel that there was something evil out there in the hills. The days were seemingly normal. Nothing odd happened, but then the sun went down. I'm certain it was out there on Friday when we got to the campground, but it moved in Saturday after nightfall. We were all sitting around the fire eating dinner when a sound came ringing out of the woods. It was metallic in nature. It sounded like someone was banging against a pan or something, and then it transitioned into a metallic scraping sound. My dad took a walk around the campground. There were only 3 other people there, and they all heard the sound too. It wasn't coming from anywhere in the campground, it was coming from the forest. My parents told us to stay close to the campsite for the rest of the night. They thought there was another person out there in the woods, and you really never know with people like that. There have been stories about campers being attacked by crazy people before. I know it doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. However, this situation wouldn't be so easily explained. We heard the metallic sound a couple more times before we eventually went to bed. I could tell my parents were on edge, and they made us promise to stay inside our tent until morning. I should mention here that whenever we went camping, my parents would have their own tent, and my sisters and I would sleep in a separate tent. Our tent was actually bigger than theirs, so we never complained. Plus, we liked the extra freedom we thought we had, even though our tents were only about 8 feet apart. My youngest sister woke me up at around 3 in the morning, saying there was someone outside our tent. I told her it was probably one of our parents checking on us, but she said no. She said it was crawling on the ground. The wall of the tent was a little bit see-through, but not enough that you could get a good idea of what was happening outside. The moon that night was full, but it still wasn't enough light to be able to see through the tent wall. Still, I knew my sister wasn't lying. I asked if it was a person, and she said yes, but there was something wrong with it. I remember she used the word it. She didn't say them. She said it. I stayed up with her for maybe 30 minutes before she fell back asleep. I realized that I really needed to go to the bathroom. It would be morning in a couple of hours, but I didn't think I could hold it. I probably should have woken up my other sister and made her come with me, but the toilet was only about 40 feet from our tent, so I grabbed the flashlight and headed out into the darkness. It would only take a minute. I looked around for signs of the person my sister thought she saw, but I didn't see any. I made it to the toilet without any incident, but on my way back, I felt that same feeling as I did on Friday night. Like there was a storm coming. And then I heard a click. It was coming from the forest, not too far from where I was standing. It was an unnatural sound that made me pause for a moment. Looking back, that is exactly what it wanted. The sounds it makes, it wants to confuse you. It wants you to stop and try to figure it out. It wants you to stay there. I knew I needed to get back to the tent ASAP. I didn't want to turn and run in case that made whatever was out there want to chase me, so I calmly turned around and began to walk away. It was then that I heard my name being called from the forest. It almost sounded like my mother's voice, but there was something off about it. And here's the weird part. It was my full name. No one in my family ever calls me that, even if I get in trouble. I always go by my nickname. Always. I turned back around to face the forest, and I saw 2 glowing eyes staring back at me. I couldn't see what they belonged to, but I knew it was something evil. I don't know how it knew my name, but I knew it was trying to keep me there. This time I ran. It didn't take me long to reach the tent, and it didn't appear that the creature attempted to follow me. I didn't get out of the tent until well past morning. I ended up telling my parents what happened on the car ride home. I thought they would be mad at me for leaving the tent after dark, but they were quiet. I don't know if they knew something more about what was out there than I did, but I was afraid to ask. They never took us back to that campground again. For the better part of my 20s, I've lived deep in the forests of Washington. Between the lush woods and the lively coast to the west, each year it feels as though dozens of locals come forward with some tale about a cryptid encounter. But real or not, cryptids are an interesting personality trait of Washington, and one of the main reasons I haven't moved closer to the city of Seattle, which I dearly love. Each Thursday evening, I find myself excited to attend the Cryptid Council weekly meeting, where individuals come to share their encounters, and every so often we plan trips to the locations of recent sightings. One particular Thursday, the day before Halloween actually, an elderly woman attended our meeting in shambles after claiming to have encountered a Sasquatch-like figure just hours before that afternoon. You should have seen the way we, my friends in the council, and I sprung to our feet. Never had an encounter been reported to the group so quickly, and it just so happened we were itching to have an outing over the holiday weekend. In no time, we each made the executive decision to call out of work the following day and scramble home to pack our bags and head out before it got too dark. Our destination, really just an extension of this woman's backyard, was about 40 minutes away from my house. So, by the time we had made it into the woods and set up our camping equipment, the sun was nearly set. Now, by no means were any of us jumping at the opportunity to take part in a camping trip where we actually thought something scary would show face. After all, nothing like that had ever happened before, so what gave us reason to believe it would now? It was more so an excuse for the four of us guys to eat junk food, drink cheap whiskey out of flasks, and tell ghost stories around a portable fire pit. A boys' weekend, if you will. So as you can imagine, come about 2 a.m. when we were all awoken by the most guttural yelping we've ever heard, we were taken aback. In situations like that, you don't spend a significant amount of time being groggy and waking up. It's like your instincts shoot along your spine, and we were all immediately on high alert. Tony was the first to say what we were all thinking when he asked, "What the hell was that?" Standing up from the ground, the wind caught my nose, carrying with it the most foul stench of urine and bee. I quickly assessed our immediate surroundings and, having not seen anything, made quick work of smothering the remaining ashes of our fire as to minimize our visibility. Before any of us had the opportunity to ask anything else or conjure a possible response to Tony's question, a series of deafening whooping noises filled the air, chilling us to the bone. Charlie was the first of the group to sprint away, and none of us had to say a word. We were all right behind him with no hesitation. After about 30 seconds of running, we came barreling into the back door of the elderly woman's home, who'd left the door unlocked in case we needed to use the restroom in the middle of the night. We quickly locked the door, pulled the blinds, and each staged ourselves at the various windows lining the backside of the house to peek outside. When the woman appeared at the top of the stairs asking us what was going on, we quickly hushed her and turned our attention back to the outdoors. And that's when it stepped into view, emerging like a giant even amongst the towering trees surrounding it. This thing must have been every bit of 11 feet tall, with dark brown fur covering it head to toe, minus its bare face. It walked on two legs, almost like an ape, but there was something humanoid about it too, like a Neanderthal with beady eyes and a projecting mouth. We were all frozen in place and didn't dare to make a sound from within the house. I was certain that if we did, and this thing wanted to, it would have easily busted through the back door. Realistically, it must have stalked around the backyard for only a minute or so before vanishing into the woods from which it came, but truth be told, it felt like an eternity watching it. At the first sign of the coast being clear, we all huddled upstairs as to make the least noise as possible and called 911. When the cops arrived and we were cleared to evacuate the property, the woman was taken to a local motel for the foreseeable few nights, and the boys and I packed back into my Jeep and hightailed it back to my house, a much safer 40 minutes away. The police never got back in contact with any of us after that night, leaving my friends and I to believe nothing was uncovered regarding whatever it was we saw in that backyard. But after that, we never participated in a cryptid council outing again. Of course, the group ragged on us for returning with one heck of a story, but no picture to support our case, but we didn't care. We all know what we saw that night, even if it's not something we could explain away with words. It all started when I decided to take a walk a few weeks ago in the middle of the night. I was in Mississippi near Meridian City. I enjoy walking through nature at night to see the wildlife in the area. It is peaceful to walk at night. No one else is around. You see more when you are alone. I think I walked about 7 miles until I saw a bridge built on top of a river. I thought this would be a great place to take a few pictures to add to my Instagram. I set up my phone on the bottom of a beam and I got into position. I had my flash on, and after it went off, I went to go look at the pic. When I looked at the picture, I could see a light in the background. It wasn't a very big light, but still there was a light. I didn't think much of it. I saw some fireflies on the trail I took, so I assumed it was one close to the camera. They were gone. I really started to get creeped out, so I left the parking lot and started my GPS to go home. I drove back to my apartment and decided to sleep that night off. I felt like I needed to sleep anyway since it was later than I was used to, and I did walk for a while. So I went to bed and set my alarm for the morning. When I woke up in the morning, I started to look through my gallery and post the pics I took last night. I saw the one with the light again. I scrolled past it and then I saw something that made my heart stop. I saw a picture with the man I saw in the background. Keep in mind, I only ever saw the woman on the riverbank when I was at the bridge. No one else was around. He had some sort of lantern and he was wearing some sort of suit. What I'm trying to say is he didn't dress like other people. The creepy part is he looked right at me. He didn't smile, didn't wave, nothing. He just stared at me, just standing there glaring at me. I was getting very creeped out at this point, but I was curious to see what other pictures I had taken. Now this is going to be very anticlimactic for some of you, but there was nothing else in any of the other pictures. No one else but me was in them, and that made me very uncomfortable. I sent a text to some of my other friends and showed them the pictures I took. I sent the one with the guy in the background, and they said I must have not been paying attention and some old man was walking around the same time I was. I told them I was completely alone and I was sure of it. And then they started mocking me, asking me if I needed to get my eyes checked or if I needed a hearing aid because I was obviously blind and deaf. I quit answering the text because at that point, they were just making fun of me and they started saying I photoshopped the guy in the back to prank them. I decided I was going to go back and try to find any sign of someone else being there that night. I didn't have time to go back there at night because some people probably would have walked on the bridge during the day and I wasn't going to get any clear answers if I waited. So I drove back to Meridian and walked the trail again. I saw my footprints were the only ones on the trail still. I made it back to the bridge. Before I stepped on it again, I took a picture to show my footprints were the only ones there. I sent that pic to my group chat, and they told me to quit photoshopping people in the background. I looked up and yet again, there was no one there. But when I looked at the picture I took, I could faintly see the man again, this time walking towards the bridge. After I saw him, I didn't want to look around and I started to walk away. I felt something was watching me and I made it back to my car. Nothing else came from those 2 days. I just have been really paranoid ever since, and my friends went to the same bridge. They told me they didn't see anything or anyone who matched the pictures I sent.